Flames flickered intermittently in the dark corner of the room. The faint orange glow left the other side in total darkness. Next to the fire was an old lady, almost motionless in her armchair, except for her right hand, which gingerly combed the willowy brown hairs of the young man sitting on the sofa beside her. 78 years of harsh winter winds had carved cracks into her skin of her wrists. 50 years of self-neglect, and unleashed the full length of her fingernails, which housed numerous clumps of grit and dirt. Dozens of their skeletal cats crawled around the room, some beside the fire, others lurking at the depths of the dark side, hunting for prey to no avail. The old lady stuck her hand into an enormous, outdated packet of cat food, and then sprinkled the moldy contents onto the floor. The silence was abruptly shattered by an eruption of screeching and hissing, as 20 cats simultaneously leapt onto what only would be their only morsel of food for the next week. Claws pierced skin, and teeth tore flesh, wild daggers running afoul of each other. Seconds later, every speck of edible material had disappeared. Unsatisfied, the starving creatures continued to search for hopefully remains. Occasionally they fired baleful glares at their captivators. Her bony fingers left the brown strands instead, gently caressed the edge of her golden archeristic photo frame. Elizabeth and David United, 1963, was engraved below a black and white photo of two newlyweds, which benefit the historical frame surrounding it. This was the only thing in the entire room, apart from an old lady herself, that was not blanketed in dust. Sunlight seeped over through the corner of the photo. The sweet glow of youth radiated from their faces. The lady sat smiling at the man's arms, her arms around his neck. For a moment she saw the picture come to life alive, and heard the faint rustling of the bride's wedding dress billowing in the wind. The groom also looked dashing. A pink carnation was clipped onto his lapel. Although it was only light gray in the picture, she could distinctively picture the vivid brightness of the color in her mind. It was the only one of every mercurial detail she noticed that day, all of which were clearly remembered, as if she videotaped everything she saw, even over half a century later. A tear crawled down the side of her face, followed by another and another. 1964. So what do you think, honey? Dave, it's gorgeous! Oh my goodness! His thumb ran along the edge of his wedding ring. He smiled in triumph. See what I mean? You've got to be rich to get a BMW new class. They're the latest. First one was manufactured only 2 years ago. She kissed the rich boy on the cheek and tossed the keys and spun them with dexterity, then unlocked the passenger door, opening it charmingly for his wife. She giggled and stepped inside. The modest black outer skin masked a proposing beauty beneath. The interior was a completely different world. Luxurious cream leather faces of surfaces induced an intermediate air of relaxation. Polished buckles gleamed like ice, pulling the seatbelt across her chest. She exhaled deeply, then fastened it tight. Dave entered the new class through the other side. He slammed the door shut and rested it still in the driver's seat. Suddenly, waves of shyness struck her like solar flares. All was quiet, and she was alone with him. She'd thought that she would be used to these awkward moments by now, since they were already a married couple. But it was her nature to feel embarrassed when she was sitting beside the most handsome, charming guy in the world. So it's just the two of us? Yes. By ourselves, sweetheart? Yes. She nodded sheepishly. Softly he touched her pink, flush-filled cheeks, which the glow radiated. He pecked her lips, and she batted her eyelashes in surprise and warm happiness. The sun was setting, and the darkness was being born. Where do you want to go? The fuel tank is pumped up bursting. Sweet. We need to have the whole night to ourselves. The beach, or the Skyliner restaurant downtown? Let's take a drive through the forest. He cocked his head. Romantic sounding, or... Well, we'll be finally alone, she admitted. He laughed loudly, and a tornado of embarrassment erupted inside her. She covered her mouth with both her hands and then turned away from him. I say the restaurant. Aw, Dave, please. The forest is so peaceful and quiet. It's lovely there. We could. She bit her lip. Anyway, you have to listen to me, Dave. You gotta go where I tell you to go. And why is that, Precious? I'm your passenger. Alright, you win. Who cares who sees what tonight? Let's just hit the road. Rows of buildings flashed by until they reached the countryside open plains. Dusk showered orange light on the fields, and silhouettes of bird flocks traveled alongside the new class. She couldn't believe her eyes. The beauty was surreal. She rolled down the window with her long blonde hair and streaked out into the open. Flapping a fresh, flowery scent filled the vehicle. The cool night, the air was curious. Dave, we're in the countryside, for God's sakes, not in the bloody parking lot. Would you please drive faster? The air on the speedometer flickered up a notch. She raised her eyebrows vehemently, still wanting some more. Dave, take me to the edge, she shouted out of the window. Her voice is instantly lost in vast, open space. He stamped on it, and they were thrown backwards, but the spines of the nice cool seats stopped them from being chucked into the boot, and their knees were cushioned after the rebound. They flew across the plains at once, their original speed, cutting through the roads like a blade. She yelled out the window once more. Hundreds of trees ran past, nature engulfed by the tiny beetle. The moon was emerging from the murky darkness, and they had entered wild territory. The BMW maintained its velocity. Gorgeous, she said, propping her head up to the elbow, which rested on the open window. The cold was starting to bite her through her sleeves, and by now darkness resigned. She rolled her eyes up the window as she unleashed the fiery yellow headlights with a flick. Pretty full on the ride, right? Dave, I love you so much. I love you too, Precious. They felt a bump. Whoa, steady there. Dave, can you slow down a little? Peace and tranquility calmed her, gently luring her into a deep sleep, beside the man that meant everything to her. Suddenly out of nowhere, the glass of the dashboard disintegrated into thousands of tiny fragments, which now flew into their faces, slicing the tiny cuts in their skin. They turned and looked at each other in horror, opening their mouths to speak. But before they could do anything else, a brutal impact stunned them silent and jerked them forwards. Regretfully, the airbags did not spring to life. It was then they released something solid. Perhaps the stump of the tree trunk had obscured the front wheel. Accelerating the excitement abruptly transformed into solid terror as shrieking screams exploded like fireworks. Their stomachs lurched as the new class became airborne, and it was flipped upside down over its headlights. It crashed into a tree, which sent it tumbling to a ditch full of litter and stinging needles. She whimpered a little, then lay still, silence regained now. The nose and hood was crushed almost flat. Darkness obscured vision terribly, but she could tell her face was swollen, bloody mess. She could feel it. There was an explicitly painful burning in her left arm, and her elbow felt as if it had been nailed on the wrong way. She howled in agony like a wounded animal and let the tears out as she clutched her arm violently. The door was already nearly half detached, and she kicked it open, stumbling out from the right side. She looked upon the broken wreck in terror. The wheels were still spinning lightly in the air, like the legs of a beetle when it's flipped on its back. The headlights were still on. The front left side had been planted into the ground. "Dave!" she screeched. Limping around the pulverized hood, she yelled his name several times. She tried with all of her might to lift the side to access the door, but to no avail. She wept furiously, re-entering the passenger door, and then crawling to the seat to reach the battered body. Leaking blood, removing a shard of glass from her collarbone, she screamed again, "Dave! Dave, get up! Please! Please, Dave! You can't die!" Sorrow, regret, shame, terror flooded all the mind at once. This should have never happened. Blood followed her command to go faster, thus was slain by her hand. It was she who had led him to his death. She choked on her own saliva, her heart in her mouth. her cheeks dripping with salty prayers. Catching her breath, she grabbed his hand with her good arm, dragging it with more force than she'd ever exerted before. Dave, please, don't let me go. His limp body was dragged across the seat, then out of the car. His neck had been bent on itself. Its skull was crushed. She lifted his arm and frantically searched for his pulse. When she couldn't find it, she turned to his neck, placed 2 fingers there. All was still as a rock. Her worst fears had confirmed. There was not a breath of air left in him. It then dawned upon her. Dave's soul had departed, and he wasn't going to come back. The only man she ever loved, the only person in the world who truly loved her, a sick, pitied orphan who had drifted a sound on his daunting world. She embraced his life form and wept in darkness for what seemed like hours. Everything had been mattered and swept away from that fateful instant. To make matters worse, she had taken him away from herself. Guilt dug into her heart like an iron stake. The only thing she could ever see from now on was darkness. A single funeral light, or life would never continue again. No, something struck her, and her eyes opened wide. She couldn't, after what she had done. They were destined to be together. Dave, don't worry, she uttered with alarming tranquility. The tears still flowed from her eyes like rivers, but she managed to smile. You're up there, safe with him now. God will look after you. She was home and back again. The old lady was close to bawling now, but tightly bottled up the grief inside. She sobbed and sobbed, slowly wailing incomprehensible words. In fits of anger, she grabbed one of the bony creatures by the neck and lifted as it helped and hissed. The others scampered in terror. Dave, it was my fault. All my fault. All of a sudden, she flung the cat into the dusty old cabinet. She screamed croakily like a frog, then proceeded to smash the frail creature's body against the cabinet repeatedly until the screeching stopped and its spine gave way. She paused for a second, then continued as the other cats watched as their small gray counterpart being smashed in terror. A few minutes later, the creature's waist had split, and its chest was close to being severed from its hips. The old lady dropped it on the floor, where it formed a grisly pile of red. She was calm now, wiping the last tear from her eye. She lapsed in a sullen silence, then back into the armchair, her eyes fixated on the photograph. She began to caress the young man's hairs again, more tenderly than before. The fear in that few remaining strands would be dislodged from his scalp. There he lay, still and breathless, just like always. She touched the decaying pink carnation of his lapel, and with all of her love, then bent down to kiss her rich boy on the cheek. Just like always, my love, still your passenger. This time you won't please drive faster. Roll the windows down, this cool night air is curious. Let the whole world look in. Who cares if she sees anything? I'm your passenger. I'm your passenger. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video. And I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new. Ring the bell for notifications to when I upload, so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.